Marcus Bennett stood at his mother's grave 7 months after her funeral, his worn work boots sinking into the mud, clutching the lawyer's envelope that revealed his late mother owned a multi-million-dollar empire he never knew existed. The same day his ex-wife Jessica posted engagement photos with his former best friend Derek on social media, captioning them, "Finally marrying a real man who can provide," completely unaware that the poor husband she'd divorced 3 months ago for barely scraping by as a mechanic was now worth $900 million. But as Marcus stared at the photographs of Jessica's smug smile and Derek's expensive suit, paid for with the $200,000 Marcus had loaned him years ago, he realized neither of them had any idea what was coming, because the broken, humiliated man they discarded was about to become their worst nightmare. How long would it take for Jessica to discover the truth? What would she do when she realized the empire she'd walked away from? And what exactly did Marcus have planned that would shatter everything she thought she'd won? Marcus Bennett stood at his mother's grave 7 months after her funeral, his worn work boots sinking into the mud, clutching the lawyer's envelope that revealed his late mother owned a multi-million-dollar empire he never knew existed. The same day his ex-wife Jessica posted engagement photos with his former best friend Derek on social media, captioning them finally marrying a real man who can provide, completely unaware that the poor husband she divorced 3 months ago for barely scraping by as a mechanic was now worth $900 million. But as Marcus stared at the photographs of Jessica's smug smile and Derek's expensive suit, paid for with the $200,000 Marcus had loaned him years ago, he realized neither of them had any idea what was coming, because the broken, humiliated man they discarded was about to become their worst nightmare. How long would it take for Jessica to discover the truth? What would she do when she realized the empire she'd walked away from? And what exactly did Marcus have planned that would shatter everything she thought she'd won? The rain had started an hour ago, but Marcus hadn't moved. His mother, Catherine Bennett, had been buried on a Tuesday in March, and he'd been the only one there. Not because she didn't have friends or connections, as he was now learning, but because she'd specifically requested a private funeral in her will. A will that had taken 7 months to fully process because of the complexity of her holdings. 7 months during which his entire life had collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. The envelope in his hand was from Whitmore and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the country, and the letter inside had been read so many times the creases were beginning to tear. "Dear Mr. Bennett, we regret to inform you of the passing of your mother, Catherine Louise Bennett, and are writing to inform you that you are the sole beneficiary of the Bennett Global Holdings conglomerate, valued at approximately $900 million. Marcus had read those words 50 times, and they still didn't feel real. His mother had worked as a school librarian his entire childhood. She'd lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in a working-class neighborhood. She'd driven a 15-year-old Honda and clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. She'd made him bologna sandwiches for lunch and bought his clothes from thrift stores. Everything about his childhood had been ordinary, unremarkable, lower-middle-class American. But apparently it had all been a lie. Not a malicious lie. The lawyers had explained that part carefully. His mother had built her empire in secret, piece by piece, starting with a small software patent she'd developed in her 20s. She'd lived modestly, invested brilliantly, and hidden everything to give Marcus a normal childhood without the corruption of wealth. According to her video message the lawyers had shown him, she'd planned to tell him everything when he turned 35, but cancer had stolen her at 62, 2 years before that revelation was supposed to come. The irony was so bitter Marcus could taste it like copper in his mouth. His mother had died 7 months ago, in April. Jessica had filed for divorce in May, exactly 3 weeks after the funeral. The divorce had been finalized in August, and she'd started publicly dating Derek in September. Now in November, they were engaged. The whole thing had moved with such calculated precision that Marcus knew, absolutely knew, they'd been planning it long before his mother's death. Probably long before the diagnosis, if he was honest with himself. He could see it now, looking back with clearer eyes. The way Derek had always been around, always offering to help with bills, always making comments about Jessica, deserving better. The way Jessica had grown colder with each passing year, more resentful of their small apartment, their used furniture, the vacation they could never afford. She'd wanted luxury, status, the kind of life Derek seemed to promise with his flashy sales job and expensive car. A car and lifestyle, Marcus now realized, that had been funded by the $200,000 loan Marcus had given him 5 years ago to invest in a sure thing. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with his free hand, the rain soaking the screen. Another notification from Instagram. Jessica had tagged him in a photo. His thumb moved on autopilot, clicking through. It was a picture of her and Derek at some upscale restaurant, champagne glasses raised, her engagement ring catching the light like a small star. The caption read, "Celebrating our future, so grateful to finally be with someone who has ambition and success. Sometimes you have to let go of dead weight to soar." A Derek Morrison. "You're everything I ever wanted." And a Marcus Bennett, 9/19/85. "Thank you for finally signing those papers. You freed me to find real happiness." Something cold and hard settled in Marcus's chest. Not the hot rage he'd felt 3 months ago when she'd served him the papers. Not the crushing despair of 2 months ago when he'd seen them together for the first time. This was different. This was clarity. This was purpose. He looked down at his mother's grave, at the simple headstone that read, "Catherine Bennett, beloved mother," and made a decision. His mother had lived in secret, had hidden her success to protect him. But that time was over. Jessica and Derek had made their choices. They'd humiliated him, betrayed him, discarded him like trash. They thought they'd won. They thought they were moving up in the world while he remained stuck at the bottom. But they had no idea about the multi-million-dollar empire he'd inherited. They had no idea that the poor mechanic they'd thrown away was worth more than they'd earn in 50 lifetimes. And Marcus was going to make absolutely certain that when they found out, it would destroy them completely. He pulled up Derek's contact information. They hadn't spoken since the divorce, since Marcus had told him their friendship was over and to never contact him again. But Derek had reached out 2 weeks ago with a message that had seemed innocuous at the time. "Hey man, I know things are weird between us, but Jess and I are getting married next month, December 15th. I know this is crazy to ask, but we'd really like you to come. Show there's no hard feelings. We're trying to be mature about this. Think about it." Marcus had deleted the message immediately, but now he opened his messages, scrolled back, and read it again. A wedding invitation. How perfect. How absolutely perfect. His fingers moved across the screen, typing slowly, deliberately. "Derek, I've thought about your invitation. You're right. We should be mature about this. I'll be there. Congratulations to you both." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The response came back within 30 seconds. "Dude, that's amazing. I knew you'd come around. You're a good man, Marcus. This means a lot to both of us. See you there." Marcus closed his messages and opened his email, finding the one from Whitmore and Associates. He scrolled to the bottom where Richard Whitmore's direct number was listed and dialed. The senior partner answered on the second ring. "Mr. Bennett, I was hoping I'd hear from you soon. Have you had time to process everything?" "I have," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the rain running down his face. "And I'm ready to take control of the company. All of it. I want full operational authority transferred immediately." There was a pause. That's excellent, Mr. Bennett. We can schedule a meeting for next week to begin the transition process. There's quite a lot to cover. Board meetings, stakeholder introductions, operational briefings. "I need something else first," Marcus interrupted. "I need you to prepare a complete acquisition proposal for Morrison Tech Sales. Every detail, valuation, assets, debts, everything. And I need it by Friday." Another pause, longer this time. "Morrison Tech Sales? That's Derek Morrison's company, isn't it? The friend you mentioned who borrowed money from you?" "Former friend," Marcus corrected. "And yes, can you do it?" "Of course, Mr. Bennett. Might I ask what you're planning?" Marcus looked at his mother's grave one last time, then turned and walked toward his truck. "Justice, Mr. Whitmore. I'm planning justice." The week that followed was a blur of meetings, paperwork, and revelations. Marcus learned that his mother's empire, Bennett Global Holdings, owned stakes in 17 companies across 5 industries: tech, real estate, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and media. She'd been a silent partner in businesses whose names he recognized, whose products he'd used, whose buildings he'd walked past 1,000 times, never knowing his mother owned pieces of them. The crown jewel was Bennett Tech Solutions, a software development company that held patents on security systems used by half the Fortune 500. His mother had founded it 40 years ago with her initial patent and had built everything else from its profits. Richard Whitmore had assembled a team of analysts who worked around the clock to prepare the Morrison Tech Sales Acquisition Report. What they found was damning. Derek's company, which Marcus had helped fund with his life savings 5 years ago, was technically successful, but catastrophically overleveraged. Derek had taken out massive loans to fuel expansion, loans that were coming due in the next 18 months. He looked successful: the fancy car, the expensive suits, the upscale lifestyle. But it was all smoke and mirrors built on a foundation of debt. One strong competitor, one market shift, one major client loss, and the whole thing would collapse. Marcus sat in the corner office of Bennett Global Holdings, his office now, reviewing the acquisition proposal. It was Friday evening, 9 days after he'd stood in the rain at his mother's grave. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights sparkled like diamonds scattered across black velvet. This office, this view, this life, it should have been his years ago. He should have met Jessica as the heir to a fortune, not a struggling mechanic. They should have built a life together with resources and opportunity. But his mother had chosen differently, and Jessica had chosen to leave when things seemed hardest. Both choices had led to this moment. The acquisition would be straightforward, Richard Whitmore said, sitting across from him. Morrison's debt makes him vulnerable. We could approach his creditors, buy up his loans, and essentially own him. Or we could make a direct offer to purchase the company. Given his financial situation, he'd probably jump at the chance. How much would it cost? Marcus asked. Approximately $15 million for a clean acquisition of the company and all its debts. It's overvalued, frankly, but the optics would be clean. Marcus did the math in his head. $15 million was less than 2% of his total net worth. Pocket change, relatively speaking. Do it, he said. But I don't want Derek to know who's buying until the papers are signed. Use a shell company, a proxy, whatever you need to do. I want him to think he's making a smart business decision right up until the moment he realizes he just sold his company to the poor ex-husband of his fiancée. Richard Whitmore allowed himself a small smile. Understood, Mr. Bennett. I'll have our team structure it appropriately. When would you like to close? Before December 15th, Marcus said. That's his wedding day. I want to own his company before he says I do. The lawyer nodded and made notes on his tablet. There's one more thing you should know. In preparing this analysis, we discovered that Mr. Morrison never repaid the $200,000 loan you gave him 5 years ago. Legally, that debt still exists. With interest, it's now worth approximately $290,000. Marcus felt that cold clarity settle over him again. Can we add that to the acquisition as part of the terms? Absolutely. We can structure it so that his personal debt to you becomes part of the corporate acquisition. He'd owe the company, which you'd own, rather than owing you personally, which means you could forgive it, collect it, or hold it over him as leverage. Your choice. Perfect, Marcus said. Let's do all of it. Buy the company, acquire the debt, and have everything ready to reveal at the right moment. Richard closed his tablet and stood. Mr. Bennett, I've been practicing law for 35 years, and I've seen a lot of revenge schemes. Most of them are messy, emotional, and ultimately unsatisfying. But this is surgical. Your mother would be proud. Marcus didn't respond. He wasn't sure if his mother would be proud or horrified. She'd lived her entire life avoiding confrontation, hiding her success, keeping her head down. But she'd also left him everything, had trusted him to use it wisely. And wisdom, Marcus had learned, sometimes looked a lot like justice. The next 2 weeks moved with mechanical efficiency. Bennett Global Holdings, through a subsidiary called Meridian Acquisition Partners, approached Derek Morrison with an offer to purchase Morrison Tech Sales for $15 million. To Derek, who was drowning in debt payments and facing a cash flow crisis, It must have seemed like a miracle. The negotiations were brief. Derek's lawyers recognized a good deal when they saw one, especially when the alternative was bankruptcy. The papers were signed on December 10th, 5 days before the wedding. Marcus received the notification while he was getting fitted for a suit. Not the cheap department store suit he would have worn as a mechanic, but a custom-tailored Tom Ford that cost more than he used to make in 3 months. The tailor was pinning the jacket when his phone buzzed. Message from Richard Whitmore. Acquisition complete. Morrison Tech Sales is now a wholly owned subsidiary of Bennett Global Holdings. All debts, assets, and contracts transferred. Mr. Morrison received his payout and signed a standard non-compete clause. He has no idea who actually bought his company. Congratulations, Mr. Bennett. Marcus looked at himself in the three-way mirror. The man staring back was almost unrecognizable from the one who'd stood in the rain 2 weeks ago. Tailored suit, professional haircut, new watch that cost 6 figures, shoes that were Italian leather. He looked successful. He looked powerful. He looked like exactly the kind of man Jessica had said she wanted. The irony was delicious and bitter in equal measure. Is the fit acceptable, Mr. Bennett? The tailor asked. Marcus nodded. It's perfect. I'll wear it to a wedding. Wonderful. The groom will be very well dressed. Marcus smiled coldly at his reflection. I'm not the groom, but trust me, I'm going to steal the show. December 15th arrived with the kind of crisp, clear winter weather that made everything look like a postcard. The wedding was being held at the Grandview Estate, a historic mansion that had been converted into an event venue, the kind of place that cost $50,000 just to rent for the day. Marcus pulled up in his new car, an Aston Martin DB12 that he'd bought on impulse, and handed the keys to the valet, whose eyes widened at the vehicle. The other cars in the lot were nice, but nothing like this. Marcus had timed his arrival carefully, not so early that he'd have to make small talk, but not so late that his entrance wouldn't be noticed. He walked through the main doors and followed the signs to the ceremony space, a grand ballroom with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers. The room was decorated in white and gold, with roses everywhere. Jessica had always loved roses. There were maybe 200 people seated, chattering excitedly. Marcus scanned the crowd and saw familiar faces. Mutual friends from his marriage, most of whom had sided with Jessica after the divorce. Colleagues from Derek's company, his former company, Marcus corrected himself with satisfaction. Jessica's family in the front rows, her mother wearing what was clearly an expensive designer dress. An usher approached him, young and overeager. Are you with the bride or groom? Groom, Marcus said. We're old friends. The usher led him to a seat about halfway back, on the right side. Perfect. Close enough to see everything. Far enough back that his presence wouldn't be immediately obvious. As he settled into his seat, he heard whispers starting around him. People were noticing him, trying to figure out who he was. He looked too well dressed, too polished, too wealthy to be someone they didn't recognize. But nobody made the connection yet. The ceremony was scheduled to start at 3 p.m. At 2:55, the music changed and everyone stood. Jessica appeared at the back of the room, walking down the aisle alone. Her father had passed away years ago, one of the genuine hardships of her life that Marcus had always felt sympathy for. But there was no sympathy now as he watched her walk past in a dress that probably cost more than their entire wedding had. She looked beautiful. He could admit that objectively. Radiant, happy, triumphant. She didn't notice him. Derek stood at the altar in his tuxedo, beaming. Next to him stood his best man, his brother Kyle, and 2 other groomsmen Marcus didn't recognize. Derek looked like he'd won the lottery. In a way, he had. He'd gotten the girl, gotten a payout from selling his company, gotten everything he wanted. For now. The officiant began the ceremony with the standard words about love and commitment and lifelong partnership. Marcus barely heard them. He was watching Jessica's face, Derek's face, memorizing this moment of their happiness, because in about 10 minutes, he was going to take it away from them forever. The ceremony proceeded smoothly. Readings were read, vows were exchanged, rings were placed, and then came the moment Marcus had been waiting for. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace, the officiant intoned, clearly not expecting an answer. Nobody ever objected at weddings. It was just a formality, a tradition. Marcus stood up. The movement caught everyone's attention immediately. 200 heads turned to look at him. He saw Jessica's face register confusion, then recognition, then horror. He saw Derek's expression shift from joy to shock to something close to fear. Perfect. I object, Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent room. And I think once everyone hears what I have to say, they'll understand why. The officiant looked flustered. Sir, this is highly irregular. If you could please... My name is Marcus Bennett, he said, ignoring the officiant and addressing the entire room. I'm Jessica's ex-husband, the man she divorced 7 months ago because I was, and I quote, too poor to provide the life she deserved. The man Derek betrayed after 15 years of friendship. He started walking toward the altar, slowly, deliberately. I know what you're all thinking. What am I doing here? Why would they invite me? Well, Derek invited me to show there were no hard feelings. To prove they were being mature about the situation, he reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. Jessica was frozen in place, her bouquet trembling in her hands. Derek looked like he might throw up. Here's what you all don't know, Marcus continued. 7 months ago, my mother died. I was devastated. I just lost the most important person in my life. And 3 weeks later, Jessica filed for divorce. While I was still grieving, while I was still trying to figure out how to function without my mother in the world, she decided that was the perfect time to leave me because I didn't make enough money. He paused, letting that sink in. He could see people shifting uncomfortably, recalculating their assumptions. But here's the really interesting part. My mother, who I thought was just a school librarian who lived modestly and died quietly, actually owned a multi-million-dollar empire. Bennett Global Holdings. Maybe some of you have heard of it? He saw recognition flash across several faces. Bennett Global Holdings was a known entity in business circles, even if most people didn't know who owned it. She left everything to me, her only child, her sole beneficiary, including approximately $900 million in assets. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Jessica's face had gone completely white. Derek looked like he might pass out. That's right, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise. The poor husband you divorced is worth $900 million, has been for 7 months. While you were parading around with Derek, posting about finding a real man who could provide, I was actually one of the wealthiest men in the state. I just didn't advertise it. He turned to Derek. And speaking of providing, Derek, I have some news for you too. Remember Morrison Tech Sales? The company you just sold 2 weeks ago for $15 million? The sale that funded this wedding, that ring, this dress, this venue, all of it? Derek nodded slowly, confusion mixing with dawning horror on his face. You sold it to a company called Meridian Acquisition Partners. But what you didn't know is that Meridian Acquisition Partners is a subsidiary of Bennett Global Holdings, which means you sold your company to me, Derek. I own Morrison Tech Sales now. I own your business, your contracts, your client list, everything. And that $200,000 you borrowed from me 5 years ago and never repaid, that's part of the acquisition too. You now owe my company $290,000 with interest. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. So let me summarize, Marcus said, addressing the entire crowd again. Jessica divorced me for being poor, not knowing I was inheriting $900 million. Derek stole my wife and my money, not knowing I would end up owning his entire company. They invited me here today to rub their happiness in my face, to show me what I lost. But what they actually did was give me the perfect stage to reveal the truth. He looked at Jessica, whose face was streaked with tears now, her carefully applied makeup running down her cheeks. You wanted a man who could provide? You had one. You wanted security? You threw it away. You wanted luxury? You literally divorced a fortune. Then he turned to Derek. And you wanted success? You sold it to me. Every client, every contract, every opportunity you built, it's all mine now. You work for me, Derek. Or rather, you did. Because effective immediately, I'm terminating your employment at Morrison Tech Sales and invoking the non-compete clause you signed. You can't work in tech sales in this state for the next 5 years. Good luck finding something else that pays for all this." He gestured around the expensive venue. Jessica found her voice finally, though it came out as a broken whisper. "Marcus, please, you don't understand. I didn't know." "Didn't know?" Marcus interrupted. "Of course you didn't know. That's the entire point, Jessica. You made your choices based on what you could see, and what you saw was a man you judged as worthless because he worked with his hands and couldn't buy you designer bags. You never looked deeper. You never considered that maybe there was more to life, more to me than a paycheck." "But your mother," she stammered. "She never told you. How could I have known?" "You couldn't have," Marcus agreed. "But here's the thing. You shouldn't have needed to know. You married me for better or worse, for richer or poorer. Those were vows you took. And the moment things looked bad, the moment my mother died and I was at my lowest, you bailed. You didn't even wait to see if things might get better. You just ran to someone who looked shinier on the surface." He looked at Derek. "And you were my best friend since college. I loaned you everything I had to help start your business. I trusted you with my money and my friendship. And you repaid me by sleeping with my wife and stealing her away. Did it start before she filed for divorce, Derek? Be honest, at least now." Derek's silence was answer enough. The crowd murmured again, louder now, shocked and scandalized. This was better than any reality TV show, and everyone knew it. "I thought so," Marcus said. "Well, I hope it was worth it. I hope these past few months of playing house while spending my $15 million were enjoyable. Because it's over now. The money's spent on a wedding that won't be completed. The company's gone. Your career in this industry is finished. And the woman you betrayed me for? She's all yours, Derek. Enjoy explaining to her how you're going to pay back that $290,000 debt while unemployed and blacklisted from your industry." He turned back to Jessica one final time. "You posted on social media that divorcing me freed you to find real happiness. You thanked me for signing the papers. You said I was dead weight you needed to let go of to soar. Well, Jessica, I hope you enjoy your flight, because I'm not the one falling." With that, Marcus walked back down the aisle. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, everyone staring, mouths open. Phones out, recording everything. This would be all over social media in minutes. Jessica's humiliation would be public and permanent. Derek's business reputation would be destroyed. And Marcus? Marcus would go back to his penthouse, to his $900 million empire, to the life his mother had built and left for him, and he would finally start living it properly. As he reached the doors, he heard a commotion behind him. Jessica was sobbing, her bridesmaids trying to comfort her. Derek was arguing with his brother, their voices raised. The officiant was trying to restore order. The whole thing was falling apart, collapsing like a house of cards, like Derek's company, like the lies they'd both built their happiness on. Marcus climbed into his Aston Martin and drove away from the Grandview estate, leaving chaos in his wake. His phone was already blowing up with messages, calls, notifications. He ignored all of them. There would be time later to deal with the fallout, to make decisions about Derek's debt and the company, and what to do next. But for now, he just drove, windows down despite the December cold, feeling lighter than he had in months. His mother had built an empire in secret, had hidden her success to give him a normal life. She died before she could tell him the truth, before she could prepare him for what was coming. But in a way, maybe her timing had been perfect. Maybe he'd needed to lose everything, his mother, his marriage, his best friend, to truly appreciate what he'd gained. Maybe he'd needed to hit rock bottom to understand the value of what he'd inherited. 7 months ago, Marcus Bennett had stood in the rain at his mother's grave, broken and alone, believing he'd lost everything. Today, he'd stood in front of 200 people and revealed the truth that his ex-wife had divorced him for being too poor, never knowing about his $900 million fortune. He'd exposed Derek's betrayal and reclaimed his power. He'd taken the humiliation they'd tried to inflict on him and turned it back on them tenfold. His mother owned a multi-million-dollar empire, and now it was his. Jessica had married his best friend, or tried to, unaware that the man she'd left was worth more than she could imagine. What he did had shocked her, shattered her, and completely destroyed the life she thought she'd won. And Marcus? Marcus was free. Free from their betrayal, free from their judgment, free from the person he'd been when he'd thought he was worthless. He pulled over at a scenic overlook and got out of the car, looking out over the city as the sun began to set. Somewhere down there, Jessica and Derek were dealing with the ruins of their wedding day, their relationship, their future. And up here, Marcus was standing on top of the world, finally ready to build the life he deserved. His phone rang. Richard Whitmore. Marcus answered. "How did it go?" the lawyer asked. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in 7 months. "Perfectly. It went perfectly." "Good. So what's next, Mr. Bennett?" Marcus thought about his mother, about the empire she'd built, about the opportunities that stretched ahead of him now. Now we build something even bigger, something that would make her proud. But first, I think I'm going to enjoy the view for a while. I've earned it. He ended the call and stood there as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, the city lights beginning to twinkle below, like promises waiting to be fulfilled. Somewhere in that city, his old life was burning to ash. And from those ashes, Marcus Bennett, heir to a $900 million fortune, owner of a multi-million-dollar empire, and the man his ex-wife had called too poor, was rising. 6 months later, Marcus Bennett sat in his corner office reviewing the quarterly reports for Bennett Global Holdings when his assistant buzzed through. "Mr. Bennett, there's a Jessica Morrison here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Marcus paused, his pen hovering over the contract he'd been signing. 6 months. He hadn't heard from either of them since the wedding, though he'd heard plenty about them. The story had gone viral, of course. Multiple videos from wedding guests had been posted online, racking up millions of views. Billionaire crashes ex-wife's wedding to reveal fortune? She walked away from had been the headline everywhere. Jessica and Derek had become cautionary tales, internet memes, examples of greed and betrayal getting their comeuppance. "Send her in," Marcus said finally. Jessica walked through the door, looking nothing like the radiant bride from 6 months ago. She was thinner, paler, wearing clothes that were nice but not designer. The spark was gone from her eyes, replaced by something that looked like exhaustion mixed with desperation. "Marcus," she said quietly, "thank you for seeing me." "You have 5 minutes," he replied, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "What do you want, Jessica?" She sat down without being invited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I came to apologize. I know it's too late. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed to say it. I was wrong. About everything. I was shallow and materialistic, and I threw away the best thing in my life because I couldn't see past dollar signs." Marcus studied her. She seemed genuine, but 6 months ago she seemed genuine when she'd promised to love him forever too. "And Derek?" Her laugh was bitter. "Derek left me 3 months ago. Once the money ran out and the debt collector started calling, once his career was destroyed and mine was impacted by association, he decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Turns out he was just as shallow as I was. We deserved each other, really." "The $290,000 debt," Marcus said. "That's why you're here." Jessica looked up at him, tears forming. "Partially. He disappeared, Marcus. Left me holding the bag for debts I didn't even know about. Your lawyers have been contacting me because my name was on some of his accounts. I'm drowning. I lost my job. No one wants to hire the woman from the viral wedding disaster. I had to move back in with my mother. Everything I thought I wanted, everything I chose over you, it's all gone." Marcus felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but not satisfaction either. Seeing her broken didn't feel as good as he'd imagined it would. "What do you want from me, Jessica?" "Forgiveness," she whispered. "Not to get back together, not for money, just, I need to know that someday you might be able to forgive me. I need to know I didn't destroy a good man along with my own life." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. 6 months ago, standing in that wedding venue, he'd felt powerful and vindicated. But in the months since, as he'd built his mother's empire into something even greater, as he'd donated millions to causes she'd cared about, as he'd learned what it meant to carry real responsibility and wealth, he'd realized something important. "You didn't destroy me, Jessica," he said finally. You hurt me, yes. You betrayed me at my lowest point, but you also freed me from a marriage that wasn't working. If you'd really loved me, really valued me, my bank account wouldn't have mattered. Your leaving showed me who you really were, and my mother's empire showed me who I really am. So you forgive me, she asked hopefully. I'm working on it, Marcus said honestly. I don't forgive Derek. What he did was a deeper betrayal. But you made a mistake, a terrible, selfish mistake, but a human one. So here's what I'll do. The debt, I'll forgive it, all of it, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to it doesn't serve any purpose anymore. You've already paid in other ways. Jessica's tears spilled over. Marcus, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, he interrupted gently. Just learn from this. Build a better life. Find someone who values you for the right reasons and make sure you value them the same way. And Jessica, don't contact me again. I wish you well, truly, but we don't belong in each other's lives anymore. She nodded, understanding, and stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. Your mother would be proud of the man you've become. I should have seen him sooner. After she left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts. His phone buzzed. A text from Richard Whitmore. New acquisition proposal ready for your review. The medical tech company we discussed. This one could save thousands of lives. Marcus smiled. This was his life now. Not revenge, not proving himself to people who doubted him, but building something meaningful with the empire his mother had left him. The fortune she'd hidden for his protection had become his greatest gift. Not because of the money itself, but because of the purpose it gave him. His mother had died 7 months before he learned the truth. Jessica had divorced him for being too poor, never knowing about his $900 million fortune. Derek had betrayed him and lost everything. But Marcus had been shattered and rebuilt himself into something stronger. He picked up his pen and returned to work, building his empire, one decision at a time. The best revenge he'd learned wasn't destruction. It was becoming so successful that revenge stopped mattering at all.